In the week between races, a secret arms deal saw the first US weapons, anti-tank missiles as it happened, shipped to Iran in exchange for funds which were then covertly funneled to the Nicaraguan Contra guerrillas who opposed the Marxist government of the Central American Republic. Both the sale of arms to Iran and the support of the Contras had been forbidden by Congress, so this whole plan was very illegal. And on race day, a small aircraft crashed in Bar Harbor, Maine, killing all 8 aboard. Among them was Samantha Smith, who in 1982 had written to Soviet leader Yuri Andropov and been invited to visit the USSR as a goodwill ambassador. In the intervening years she had become a child actress, hosting a Disney Channel special on the 1984 presidential election and co-starring in TV series Lime Street before her tragic death at the age of 13. Meanwhile, the F1 world had been busy in the week between races, with the announcement of Niki Lauda's retirement kicking off a round of musical chairs and much rumour and hearsay. What was definitely confirmed was that Keke Rosberg would be moving to McLaren to take Niki's place, Nelson Piquet would be leaving Brabham after 7 seasons and replacing Keke at Williams, and Elio De Angelis would be moving to Brabham to fill his seat. Who would fill the second Lotus seat was a hot topic of discussion, with Derek Warwick favourite if, as widely expected, the Works Renault team was wound up. Andrea de Cesaris, meanwhile, had been told that the Dutch Grand Prix would be his last for Ligier, the crash in Austria apparently the last straw for Guy Ligier, and so there would be an available seat there in Italy too. More rumours related by the BBC's Murray Walker during the race coverage included that Derek Warwick would return to Tolman, or go to Brabham, that Eddie Cheever would go to Tolman, that Tombe would drive the Beatrice Lola Ford, that Patrese would be at Brabham next year, and perhaps most unlikely of all, that Andrea de Cesaris would be in a Ferrari in 1986 and would replace Sierra at Brabham for the rest of this season. The F1 silly season is certainly never dull. For this race, however, there were no changes on the grid since Austria, except that Tyrrell now had enough Renault turbo units for both drivers to have one, so they reverted to their original car numbers, and the 1985 Dutch Grand Prix would be the first F1 race ever where every car entered had a turbocharged engine. Friday morning practice was the usual lively affair, with Patrese driving into Warwick and damaging the Renault beyond repair, Piquet spinning his race car into the sand, and Senna catching fire when his turbo blew. Realising he was on the track just behind the pits, he turned off and drove his burning Lotus down the escape road and all the way into the paddock to get it put out quickly. He was fined $5,000 for his efforts for leaving the track at an unauthorised point. The afternoon saw the clouds sweep in, and by 1:30 it was too late to put in a good time as the rain came down, and it was Piquet who led the standings with a time of 1:11.074. Last year's pole time of 1:13.567 would only have been good enough for 14th, such is the pace of development in F1. Saturday was even wetter, and although some drivers went out for a bit of wet weather practice, there was no chance of times coming down, so it was Piquet on pole for the first time in 1985, with Rosberg alongside, then Prost and Senna on row 2, Fabi 5th after another excellent qualifying, Tombe 6th, then Mansell and Boutsen, Sierra and Lauda making up the top 10. The Ferraris were back in 16th and 17th place after complaining about their cars jumping around all over the track, thanks, it later transpired, to some dodgy maths, meaning the shocks and springs were set up wrong. They were both behind a satisfied Ghinzani in the second Tolman, the Turbo Tyrrell twins were 21 and 22, and local boy Rottengatter squeezed onto the grid at the back. Odd man out was Kenny Aitchison, who blew the Hart engine in his own ram, had to qualify in Alios, only for Philippe to break his gearbox, so poor Kenny only managed one flying lap, a second adrift of hope. Saturday dawned sunny. There was the usual breeze off the North Sea, but there didn't seem to be any clouds there either. The morning warm-up looked better for Ferrari, who were timed 3rd and 4th, while the Renault team looked all at 6s and 7s. Warwick was still in the spare, so when Tombe's race car also started misfiring, they had to ship a 4th chassis out from Paris overnight. It was set up for Patrick, he went out, and the suspension collapsed the first time he braked for Tarzan and sent him into the sand trap at north of 200 miles an hour. Already thoroughly demoralised, the sight of their engineers welding stiffening rods onto the suspension probably didn't improve Derek and Pat's mood any. When the pit lane opened for the race, Tombe's car was still misfiring and he came back in to get it looked at, which took so long he missed the parade lap and would have to start from the back, so much for 6th on the grid. Finally it was time for the start, and the lights went green, 25 cars screamed off the line, and Nelson Piquet went precisely nowhere, while Boutsen struggled to find a gear before finally getting away. Everyone avoided Piquet as he gestured for a push start, and he finally got away too, dead last. Meanwhile, Rosberg had taken the lead, chased by Senna and Fabi, with Prost and Lauda 4th and 5th, the Austrian having made up 5 places on the start. By the end of lap 1, Rosberg was already a second ahead of Senna, and there were 3 retirements before the end of the next lap, with Cheever and Patrese both having turbo failures, and Martini rather bending his Minardi on the walls. While all this was going on, Prost got ahead of Fabi into 3rd and set about Senna. A few laps later, Lauda also went past the Tollman while Prost was tucked up under Senna's rear wing. Local boy Rottengatter brought his Ozella in to have something looked at, which cost him several laps, while the Ferraris had made it up to 10th and 11th but were already nearly 15 seconds off Rosberg's blistering pace, while Mansell and Warwick were having a lively scrap over the last point, with De Angelis waiting to pounce on any errors. Soon the 3 of them were hauling in Fabi too. Johansson's miserable luck continued as his engine gave up after 9 laps, by which time the pace of the Senna-Prost battle was seeing the pair catch Rosberg, and Lauda was bearing down on all of them. Ginzani came in with a sick engine to retire after 12 laps, and while the cameras followed De Cesaris for a while, maybe the director thought it was Rothengatter's blue Ozella, both McLarens passed Senna, whose engine had momentarily cut out completely. Before too long, the top 4 were close together and looking pretty fired up. Down in 9th, Alboreto had a charging Tombe climbing all over the back of him, which didn't look great for Michele's championship prospects, especially when he nearly outbraked himself into Tarzan as the Renault got through. The leading 4 had now split into 2 pairs, with Rosberg still leading Prost and Lauda fighting off a resurgent Senna, at least until Rosberg's engine let all the magic blue smoke out on lap 21 and he pulled off, just as Niki Lauda came in for a fresh set of tyres. So now it was Prost leading Senna by 5 seconds, with Warwick now up to 3rd, having passed Mansell, as had a flying Tombe. Nigel was 5th, with Alboreto now up to the points in 6th. But the Ferrari, as with many others, had the softer C-compound Goodyears on, and other drivers wearing those were starting to come in for new boots after just 1/3 distance. The weekend's rain had meant that Goodyear hadn't been able to gather enough data and had had to guess at what compound would be best, and it was beginning to look like they'd guessed wrong. The flying Patrick Tombe turned into the cruising Patrick Tombe on lap 22, just as there was a flurry of tyre stops, including Mansell and Senna, and De Cesaris ended his Ligier career on a damp note with a turbo failure. Derek Warwick had risen to 2nd with all the stops, just as his gearbox gave out after lapping Piquet, as Lauda surged past the pair of them. So it was Alboreto 2nd and chasing Prost, with Lauda, Sura, Senna and Berger in the rest of the points-paying positions. Senna wasn't going to stay behind the Swiss driver long, and soon got passed into Tarzan and left the Brabham behind, as its BMW started sounding a bit sick. Further up, Lauda had caught Alboreto, who was still on his original tyres, and pulled out to pass, just as the Ferrari popped in for new rubber, followed the next lap by Prost. By the time everyone had stopped for tyres and the race had reached about half distance, Lauda led Senna by about 3 seconds, with Prost another 11 seconds back, then Sura 3 seconds behind him and fading, with De Angelis and Alboreto just taking 6 back off Berger. Sura dropped behind De Angelis and Alboreto, while Stefan Beloff went out with an engine failure after 30 laps. Beloff's teammate Brundle, running a pretty good 7th, held his old F3 sparring partner Senna up long enough for Prost to catch up, and a few laps later he was passed and up into 2nd. He had a gap of 10.7 seconds to Lauda and nearly 20 laps to make it up, so once again it looked like we might have a McLaren versus McLaren fight if only Lauda could keep going for a change. If anyone wondered about Niki's motivation or team orders from McLaren asking him to move over for title challenger Prost, they were set straight as Lauda continued lapping fast, but Prost was lapping even faster and catching him. Senna and Alboreto in 3rd and 4th seemed to have settled for finishing where they were, so it was all down to the McLaren boys. Alain caught Niki when the Austrian was bolt slightly lapping De Angelis, and soon the pair were running close together with 5 laps to go. Neither driver was willing to give ground, but Prost could never quite get close enough to make a move on the main straight. He had a look and nearly came a cropper as the pair lapped Rottengatter, but Niki knew exactly how wide to make his car, and Alain just couldn't find a way through. It was a fantastic duel and one we'd been hoping for all year. At the end of it, Niki Lauda crossed the line to win his first race of the year and his 25th in total, equalling Jim Clark's total and just 2 away from Jackie Stewart's all-time record of 27. 3rd place was taken by Senna, who had successfully held off Alboreto in a battle just as absorbing as the Lauda-Prost one, with De Angelis and Mansell taking the last points and Brundle coming home a fine 7th, with Piquet 8th and lapped, having posted lap times not far off the McLarens all race, but must have been wondering what might have been. So, Prost went into the lead of the championship by 3 points from Alboreto, with De Angelis all but out of the running now, while Senna drew level on points with Johansson in 4th. McLaren's 1-2 and Ferrari's bad showing put Ron Dennis's team just 5 points behind the Scuderia, who had looked so secure in their lead just a couple of races ago.